Hello, in this video I am going to talk about double transforms. Now I recently uploaded 2 videos about double transforms, but this video is going to be a kind of main tutorial, and I guess I can have those other 2 vids as complementary, but this is going to be the main tutorial. I have a scene here with a mesh item, and the geometry is a simple sphere. I also have a couple of locators, like you can see in the item list, and a weight container. And in the schematic view, I have dragged everything in here. As you see right now, nothing has been plugged in. So with in item mode, the sphere geometry selected. When I press the W key, it's just the sphere which is being moved around, and there are no deformers acting on that sphere geometry. So this tutorial is about double transforms. In order to explain what exactly double transforms are, I'm first going to say what I'm doing right now in move mode, the W key to move my geometry. I am actually kinda deforming my sphere geometry. You say, well, what do you mean? Deforming? You are moving it? Well, moving geometry kinda can be seen as deforming the object, since all the components that make up this geometry actually get transformed into space. That get new values. So whether you go into component mode and select a face and move that face around, or whether you move it in item mode as a whole, actually you're kind of deforming it. So this can be seen as a single deformation. Now, problems can and will occur once you add other deformations to a mesh item, as I've experienced, and this is the reason why I'm making this tutorial. So right now, this mesh item, this sphere geometry, is standalone. As you can see in the item list, nothing has been parented, and as you can see in the schematic view, nothing has been plugged in. I'm going to my properties and reset all, so my sphere goes back to its original position. So what do I have here in my schematic view? Actually, these first 2 are transform effector deformers. When you go to your setup tab, to the commands tab and to the deformer tab, you see over here you have transform deformer, and over here I have another transform deformer, but this one has been created manually, meaning I have over here, when you click here, created a locator. I have over here a general influence, which can be created by going to new deform item over here, then influences, and then general influence. When you click on general influence, then nothing will appear over here or in the item list, but in the deformers tab up here, when you click over here there will be a general influence, and when you click and drag it in the schematic view, it will appear over here. And I have a weight container, which can be created again in the commands tab, deformers tab, over here, create container. Now I'm going to try and make this tutorial really simple as possible, so that newcomers and newbies to rigging can follow along. So in order to first, I'm going to show you what this does, and then I'm going to show you how you can create it. So when I plug this in and select this transform effector in the schematic view, so you see it's highlighted right now, and in my item list you can see the transform effector, which I've called transform effector top. I've added the word top to it. Is highlighted, and when it was selected, so when I press the W key and move this around, you see what this transform effector does. It actually moves part of that mesh that has been weighted and it has been weighted, and I'm going to my lists over here to my weight maps, and you see here it's actually this weight map that has been created for it. So when I select this in my lists and go to vertex map view, you can see that these verts have been weighted. And in order to create this transform effector, first I'm going to reset everything. So reset all, go back to my shaded view. All you have to do is in item mode select your sphere, then go to your lists and select your weight map, which already has been done, so I'm going to select it again, and then go to the commands tab, deformers tab, and press the transform button, and then this setup will appear in the schematic view. That is, if you have to have dragged this sphere item into your scene. So this is a transform effector. This is a deformer. When you excuse me, apply a deformer to a mesh and are going to do other deformations on that mesh, then strange things can happen because of double transforms, and that is what this video actually is about. So when this is not plugged in, then when I select the sphere as I've shown earlier and move it around, it is kind of this deformation as I've explained. Control Z to undo. And when I add, and I'm going for clarity, select this and move this over here. When I add a transform deformer, now when I were to move I'm first going to move the transform deformer so that it becomes more obvious. Now when I move and kind of deform my geometry, pressing the W key and move it around, everything seems fine, but as soon as I go to press the E key for rotate, going to rotate, as you can see my mesh gets deformed in a way that I did not expect when I first started doing this, and I did not know what was going on. So what is this? What now has happened is actually what is called the double transform. So I have deformed my mesh by selecting it and moving it, but that mesh is also being influenced by that transform effector deformer, and those values somehow internally get added up or whatnot and result in this kind of behavior when you rotate your mesh item. Now this can be what you are after, and in that case, well, there is no problem, but I wanted something else. What I wanted to do is when I move the mesh itself, that it did not get deformed by that other deformer, and as you can see in this setup, this does not work. I'm going to select my sphere and reset it. Select reset all, so it's back to my original position. So I thought, well, maybe I can parent this item to another locator, so I'm going to do that now. Pull my sphere on top of my locator parent, select that locator parent and move that around, and maybe this will resolve the problem. So when I move it, everything seems fine, but when I rotate that parent, exactly the same problem occurs. My mesh does not get rotated as a whole, it actually gets rotated and deformed by my transform effector, and that is not what I want. And on the forum, on the community, the Foundry forum, there was this very helpful Canadian, and his name is Clef, and I really have to thank him for all of this, because it is he who taught me all of this. So thank you, Clef. I made you a card. Going back to my scene now. First of all, I'm going to reset my geometry. So reset all. Oh, I have to select the parent locator, reset all, and I'm going to, for now, unparent the mesh geometry item again, so it is standalone, and as you can see in the item list, in the schematic view, it is still being influenced by this transformer vector. So what Cliff actually taught me is that when you are going to deform geometry by means of a deformer, in that case you should act on that mesh geometry only by means of deformers. What does this mean? Well, this means that instead of selecting the mesh itself, or if it's been parented by selecting its parent, instead of doing that, I should create another deformer that is going to take care of the translation and rotation and positioning of the entire mesh. And this can be done in two ways. Again, with a new transform effector that you create the same manner as I've created the first one, like I have here. And when I plug this in and select my general influence, you see it's set to type weight map, and the weight map name is all. So when I go to my lists, you see I have my weight maps top, which is being used by the transform effector that is going to move the top, and I have a weight map called all. And when I go to my vertex map view, you see it has all the vertices in it with the value of 1. So the result of this is that when I select that locator, that transform effector, you see it's highlighted now, and in the item list it has been highlighted. Press the W key, and when I move this around, I'm going back to my shaded view, when I move that around, that transform effector, then my whole mesh gets translated. And more importantly, when I rotate it, you see it does not get deformed by the other transform effector. So there is no double transform, because in this setup the geometry is being manipulated only by means of transform of deformers. Sorry about that. What is important in this setup is the deformers tab up here. So when you go to the deformers tab, you see that you have your general influences over here and your weight container. This is something I'm going to cover later on. The order in which these are placed is very important. Right now everything works, so the order is okay. On a side note, this stack is being evaluated from the bottom to the top. So what you place on top is being evaluated or calculated last. What you find at the bottom is being calculated or evaluated first in the stack. So this is important to know. So in my example right now, if I were to select this transform all, which is actually this general influence, and were to pull it down over here, and I'm going to select my transform effector, this I think let me think for a while. I don't know if I have, yeah, W, going to my transform effector again, rotate it. You see, it is still confusing. I transform all, transform full mesh. That is that one. I should have chosen this one. You see, sorry about, you see, it's confusing. The deformers tab still is a bit of a mystery to me, because I have found no documentation on the deformers tab, or very little. You can actually not find out what is going on behind the screen. So with this transform top general influence on the bottom of the stack, which is on top of the list, when I move or rotate my effector for everything, then my geometry gets again messed up like that. Like you can see, hopefully it's visible, like that, just as if I had selected my mesh geometry itself and moved that around with the effect of the transform deformer on top of it. So the order of operations in the deformers tab is extremely important, but this is also actually the power of this kind of setup that Clef taught me. When you add a deformer to a geometry and you also add other deformers to that geometry to move it as a whole, you kind of have influence over how the order of things will happen. So I can reorder stuff up here. So when I pull my all again back over top, meaning it will now be evaluated last in the stack, then you can see with my transform effector all, when I rotate it, the mesh geometry does not get deformed on top of the rotation that I am doing. And this way you can avoid a double transform like that. Back to my schematic view, I also have this setup, and this is something I have created manually, as I've explained earlier. So by creating a locator, a general influence, that you can go to new deformer influences, general influences, and then pull it from the deformers tab into from here you can click and drag it into your schematic view, and a weight container that you can create over here, and that has been dragged from the item list into here, plugged into everything. And this weight container is, when I select it and go to my shaded view, vertex map, you see it's actually is the same thing, or is going to do the same thing as this transform effector. So this actually is a transform effector. It has not been created through this transform button over here, but it is completely the same setup, and I have created not a weight map for this, but a weight container, and that's actually the only difference. So when I unplug this, I'm going to plug this back in, going to move this aside and move this over here and plug this over here. Vertex map back to shaded view. Going to press the spacebar and the escape key a couple of times to deselect everything. Going to select first this one and reset all, so that everything is back to its original state, to make things clearer. Okay, like that. So first I'm going to make a transformation with the deformer. I'm going to push this up, pull this up, like that. And now I'm going to select my other locator, just so the locator I've created myself, I've given it a custom display. You can do that over here in the display tab, locator shapes, and with a custom display, but it's actually the same kind of item as those other locators. And it's going to do the same thing as that transform effector. In fact, it is a transform effector. It's just created manually. So when I move it, the whole geometry gets moved. When I rotate it, you see it does rotate, but as you can see, my mesh gets deformed just as if I had moved the mesh geometry itself. And again, as I've explained earlier, this has to do with the order of things. So I've unplugged things over here and plugged other effectors in, and then when this happens, I have to check my influences. So I have my transform for the full mesh, and this has to be last in the stack, so on the top of the list. And as you can see now, by reordering over here in the deformers tab, now when I select my locator and rotate it, it rotates as I want. Of course, everything depends on what you want to do. If you're fine with that deformation that is going on, then by all means leave it as it is. But it is important to know that when you add a deformer to geometry, that when you are going to manipulate that geometry itself by going to the item mode and selecting that geometry and moving that around, you see unpredictable things happen. When I move to the right, then my mesh goes down, and when I move to the left, my mesh goes up. When I rotate it, it's being deformed, and this is because when there is a deformer active on a mesh, it is best to separate the manipulation of that mesh from the mesh itself, so to speak, and only manipulate that mesh through other deformers. Hope that is clear, because this is essential to what exactly double transforms are. So I'm going back to my properties to reset everything. And so this is exactly what's going on. I have a transform effector that operates on the top vertices through a weight map, and here I have a transform effector that has been created manually with a locator, a general influence, and a weight container that operates on the whole mesh, and that I can use to move everything without it being extra deformed when in the deformers tab the right order is being respected. So hope that makes sense. Another thing I wanted to show you is I was doing the Fireboy tutorial earlier, and also in that tutorial by Andy Brown, at a certain point when he is attaching transform deformers to the eyelids and then moving the head joint, then there is a double transform on the eyelids, and this is again because of double transforms. So the general influence over here in that scene, they are below over here what is a folder, a normalizing folder, which contains all the joints. If I pull this is the upper left eyelid, if I pull this above the skeleton, yep, then is this the, no, it's the lower eyelid. I should take the upper line, yep, because that one has been animated. As you can see right now, there is a double transformation going on. So the mesh geometry is being deformed by a rig, which actually is kind of a transform deformer, because those so-called bones are nothing more than locators that have been given a custom display. So when you select that joint and you go to display, you can actually, when I would say, well, I want it to be a pyramid or a box, so you see this is nothing more than locators with custom shapes. So you could create your sphere completely from locators, and Then in the schematic view, locators, general influences, and weight containers, and that's in that way you actually have these same deformers as if you would create them with the user interface. It's exactly the same thing. So this mesh is being deformed by a deformer, a skeleton in this example. And so what Cliff taught me and what I've explained earlier, the general what you should be aware of is that when you add a deformer to that mesh, then you should only operate on that mesh only through other deformers, which Andy Brown is actually doing in the case of the eyelids through the deformer transform effector he has created for the upper eyelids, and the order in the evaluation deformer stack is important. So as I've shown, when you create those transform effectors, they get added on top of the list, which is at the bottom of the stack, and this means that they are above the skeleton, and then a double transform is going on. When I pull it below the skeleton, you see everything pops back into place as I want, and this is what illustrates double transforms. So I'm going to repeat everything. I hope I'm not repeating too often, because I tend to actually do that. So I'm going back to my sphere scene, going to select everything and in properties reset all, so everything is back to where it should be. So as explained, when you add a deformer to geometry, then strange things can happen if you manipulate that geometry directly or indirectly through a parent, as I've shown earlier. So in order to avoid that, when you add a deformer to the mesh and you also want to be able to control the mesh as a whole, then you should add, as I've done, another deformer by creating yourself, like I've done here. Locator, general influence, and weight container, or you could use the UI and select your mesh, select your weight map, control click on all over here, and go to your commands tab, deformers tab, and press transform, and then this then this will be created, and then I can delete that and plug this in, and this is exactly the same. The difference being this is being created on a weight map through the UI, and this has been created manually. And actually, as I've learned recently also, if you plan to make your rigs reusable, so for use to rig other characters, then this is actually a better way to do it, because with weight containers you can transfer weight containers, and then when you're rigging your character, add the necessary vertices to that container. Whereas when you're working with a weight map, so I'm going to properties, you see type weight map for these have been created through the UI transform button over here. So with the weight maps belong to the mesh itself, so you can't transfer a weight map from a mesh to another mesh, but you can export your rig with a weight container. On a side note to that. So again, the most important thing to remember about double transformers is as soon as you start working with a deformer, then it is good practice to make sure that all your operations that are going to occur on the mesh are being done by means of other deformers and not by manipulating the mesh itself. And it kind of makes sense because why? Well, with other deformers you have this deformer stack, and you, as you can have seen, you can reorder them yourself. But if I don't create a deformer for the whole mesh over here, and I want to move that whole mesh, well, then there is nothing for me over here to reorder. So when I move this completely and rotate this, you see it gets deformed. When I had another deformer with these setups, I could reorder them, but when I choose the mesh itself and manipulate that, or if I had parented this mesh and had rotated the parent, then there actually is nothing in the deformer tab to reorder. It's information or data that I cannot get to without creating an extra deformer. So I hope all of this clarifies the problem. I have had a hellish time with it, figuring it out. So again, a lot of thank you to Cliff from Canada. You've been a lifesaver. So I hope this wasn't too confusing. I hope you find it useful. This was Dominic. Bye for now.